By the end of this weekend, every Chicago Catholic League team will have begun its season, and some of the results may completely change what we think we know. Which defending champ is most likely to stumble out of the gate? Which Catholic League team is ready to deliver the first big upset of the season? And perhaps most importantly, when the final whistle blows, who will have made the better predictions, Dan or me? Welcome to the first Prognosticus episode of the 2026 Chicago Catholic League football season. Tonight, Dan and I are previewing every Week 1 game involving the Chicago Catholic League football team. We have heavyweight showdowns like Mount Carmel against East St. Louis, Loyola Academy against Warren, and Brother Rice against Lincoln Way East. We have some intriguing out-of-state matchups, rivalry games between Catholic League programs, and several games that could be much closer than people expect. So for each matchup, we'll discuss the biggest storyline, the players and matchups that could decide the game, what each team must do to win, and then Dan and I will put our reputations on the line by making our official predictions. No changing our picks after kickoff, no pretending we didn't say it. We'll keep track throughout the season and find out which one of us truly deserves to be called Prognosticus. The long off season is finally over, and Week 1 of the Chicago Catholic League football is here. So let's get started. And Dan, I've been telling you all along that I can't wait for this season to get started for some reason. I always like when the season gets going, but for some reason this year seems to be a little bit more, I've got a little bit more excitement, a little bit more anxiety, a little bit more energy about it. What do you think that is?
I think it's because we've got a lot better games Week 1. I think
Maybe.
a lot better. I think if this is a result of the change in the playoff structure, it's a huge positive right off the bat, because you've got not just Mount Carmel playing some school or one of the blue divisions playing East St. Louis or something. You've got good games up and down, and meaningful games, and games that are going to tell us a lot, barometer games, rivalries throughout the divisions. You've got interleague play, which is kind of cool too. So I think that's part of it. You know, it's funny because it's a little early. It feels early to me.
It does.
You know,
well, it's a week earlier, right?
Yeah. I mean, it shouldn't feel that different being 1 week, but it does, you know, and I think maybe the last night or two, maybe a little crispness in the air, maybe, and maybe that's coming, which is always awesome. So it's exciting. It is a great time to be a high school football fan. It's always really, really great that every school feels like they're in it. A lot more schools are in it this year, which should be cool. We've got your public and private debate, which is ongoing, just picks up right where it left off. So let's get rolling. Make some predictions here.
Yeah, and the Prognosticus, as you know, most of our listeners probably know, but some of our new listeners don't know. But there's a little bit of history behind it, right? And it kind of stemmed from an episode, I think it was episode 18, where I tried to say the word prognosticator, I think, is what I was trying to say, and it didn't quite work out.
I go back and listen, Joe, just to get a laugh in.
Well, here you go. And we are back with what we're calling our Prognosticus episode. That is the mythological creature that we introduced in episode, I think, 18, which for our listeners, they can go back and listen to it if they want.
Yes, it was a great moment. Maybe best for brothers, but man, it was a great moment. I have laughed several times thinking of that moment.
Yes, the Prognosticus is the mythological creature who predicts football scores for the Chicago Catholic League, and winners, not scores, winners. Yeah.
We can't pick scores.
So anyways, the Prognosticus was born many episodes ago, and it's turned into be one of the favorite episodes, I think, for a lot of our listeners. And we're not going to disappoint them this year. I don't know, did your Prognosticus tap on your window today, Dan?
Yeah, started last night. Yeah,
really?
A lot of stuff out there. Tap, 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 tap. Squawk, squawk, squawk.
Squawk, squawk. Mine weighed into, and the theme of the conversation I had with him was this.
You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, yours shows up with attitude. That's for sure.
It does show up with attitude. I'm like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah. I don't know. Mine's all business. Yours is yours. Well, we've always said yours reminds us of our dad. So
right,
so shows up crabby,
old crabby Italian man. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. But we're going to talk about each of the games tonight and make our predictions. In this Prognosticus episode. If you want a little bit of a deeper dive, we will have that available for you on our Substack page. So for those of you who have not visited Substack, you can go there. You can see a lot of our posts on our different podcasts. There's some articles out there as well, a little bit deeper dive stuff on not only our predictions, but other things throughout the year as well. So if you go to thevarsityvoices.substack.com, you can go there, you can subscribe, and you can get some additional content that I think those of you who are fans of the Chicago Catholic League in football and of the Varsity Voices are going to really enjoy.
And Joe, we started out the week by putting out our own top 10 power rankings.
Yes.
And we put it out there. So yeah, you want to go and track that. There might be some surprises there.
I think so.
I know mine had some surprises, but it's it'll be interesting to follow and track from week 1 through the playoffs but yeah, so check out the Substack page. There's always cool stuff, and we're always thinking of new things to add to give you a little more info as you enjoy this high school season.
Yeah, and there's going to be things that you can only get at our Substack.
Right.
Like the power rankings that you just mentioned. We've got the preseason team power rankings out there for Dan and me. And as we go through the season, we'll not only keep those kind of updated and from week to week, but we're also probably going to dive into some power rankings by position as well, that you'll be able to get there on Substack too. So make sure you visit it. And make sure you subscribe, and you will get a lot of additional information. Dan, you mentioned right away up front some of the types of games, that maybe it's the games that are really a lot more interesting, right? That makes the energy a little bit ramped up this season versus some of the other seasons. And let's start right away with probably the biggest game of the week. I think most people would say, and that's Mount Carmel versus East St. Louis. And this is about as good as a week 1 matchup gets, I think. You've got 2 of the premier programs, both ranked number 1 in their respective preseason classifications. Mount Carmel, they begin the season number 1 in 8A, while East St. Louis is the unanimous number 1 team in Class 6A. Mount Carmel's chasing a 5th consecutive state championship. East St. Louis is trying to rebound after losing to Fenwick last year in the 6A title game. So this game, Dan, has classic written all over it, I think.
Yeah, and we've seen East St. Louis kind of do this and schedule one of these teams early on every year, and they play the most national schedule, them and maybe Mount Carmel, out of anyone in the state. And yeah, this team, if people want to see high school, the top talent in the country, all on one field, this is a game to watch, because there is you are going to be seeing these players starting on Saturdays for schools that are games of the week every week. You've got Roman Iguabikwe, you've got Quentin Burrell, you've got Myson. His name is escaping me, Joe. You're going to help me out.
His name is Myson Cook.
Yes. And the running back, and we were kind of in awe of how he was last year. And then Mount Carmel, we don't want to redo that show of the players, but they're absolutely loaded. Where they're not, Joe? There's some question marks about quarterback.
Yeah.
Right. And now they've had new quarterbacks and they've seemed to not skip a beat. I don't know if that's the case. And I found myself really thinking about returning quarterbacks being a factor in this in week one. And it really slanted my decision making. So East St. Louis has their quarterback back, and they've got weapons on the outside. They've got some great receivers, running back. I don't know how they'll be defensively, but should make for a really interesting game.
It's Myson Johnson Cook, by the way.
Myson
I think I said
Cook.
Myson Mason.
Yes.
I do like Myson Mason Cook.
I do too. I think that'd be a good name too. Yeah.
Yes. And you just mentioned Myson Johnson Cook for East St. Louis just had an incredible year last year. He's a Auburn commit, I believe, right?
Yeah.
And you know what his average yards per attempt were last year, Dan?
Wasn't it double digits? Wasn't it like 10?
Over 10. Over 10 yards per attempt.
Crazy. Yeah.
But I do think that, as far as matching up with a particular defense, they're going to have some issues moving the ball the way they are used to moving the ball with Myson Johnson Cook against the Mount Carmel defense. And you just rattled off just some of the names on the defense for Mount Carmel. You've got Roman Igwebike, Darren Graham, Caleb Tucker, Bone Crusher, got Tavares Harrington, Isaac Saldana. So they've got players at each level on the defense, meaning Mount Carmel, that are really going to cause some fits for East St. Louis. And I do agree with you that the quarterback question for Mount Carmel, even though Ryder Starks is a great athlete, played backup last year, quarterback, and I'm sure he's ready to go this year, but I do think that's probably the primary question for Mount Carmel this year. Is they've got some huge weapons, as we know, Marshawn Thornton and Quentin Burrell and Nathan Samuel as well at running back. So that'll be one of the more interesting things to see, is how the quarterback position kind of plays out for them.
Yeah, it'll be telling. Joe, I'm picking East St. Toulouse. So I am.
Okay.
I think it's East St. Louis's turn to kind of shock the state of Illinois, and I won't say shock the world, but it's surprising to think that they would do that. But I think, especially around here, everyone has just heard Mount Carmel. I think East St. Louis is coming out with something to prove, and I think that after the state championship game last year, I think they are going to be fired up. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. I do think East St. Louis moves the football, and I'm picking them to, and it's a surprise, right? Mount Carmel's got to be the favorite. So I'm picking East St. Louis. Yeah, I'm going to pick East St. Louis. Yeah,
and this game is on Saturday. Yes. I don't think we said that, and it's at Illinois State. So it's nobody's home game. I'm not sure how much that matters, to these two teams or not, but I would think Mount Carmel is a slight favorite as well. And, I've looked at this game and I've thought, if this turns into a scoring, just kind of extravaganza on both sides of the ball, I like Mount Carmel from that aspect, right? I think it's going to be a high scoring game. But I'm going to pick Mount Carmel to kind of eke this out at the end and get their first win of the year. So I'm going with Mount Carmel. You're going with East St. Louis. It's a great way to start, Dan. We're on different sides of the ball already.
And I think we'll see that a lot, Joe, because we have, again, because of the good games. So we'll keep rolling.
Some really good games. All right, so let's move on to Marist versus Simeon. This is another Saturday game. And I think this is one of the more interesting week one matchups as well, Dan. Marist finished last year only 4-5, but I do think that record is misleading. And we mentioned this, or we talked about this in some of our previous episodes where we were previewing the divisions, because as you said, Marist had a ton of injuries last year and really had to kind of reshuffle the deck, all season as far as trying to find the right combination of players here and there. Simeon had a good year last year. They were 7-5. They got all the way to the 6A, I think, quarterfinals, and they lost to East St. Louis. They lost big, right? But I think for Marist, this might be an opportunity for them to kind of demonstrate that last season was more of an injury-induced kind of step back or step backwards than what it is going to be for them this year.
Yeah, Joe, the way I'm thinking about this, I think Marist, it's week 1. Can we do backs against the wall? BATW.
Right away, we're going BATW. I like it.
Looking at their schedule, it just gets nothing but more difficult. And there's no guaranteed wins anyway, but they are, I don't know how many games they'll be favored in. This one, I think they're favored in. I think they want to make a statement. It's at Marist, which is that's a big deal because I think they play well there. They have great support there. I always say it every time we talk about Marist. It's a great home field advantage, so I'm taking Marist in this one because I think they are a team on a mission. I think Simeon is good, just not quite to the level of Marist. I don't know that they've got enough horses to stick with Marist. There's a lot of unknown on Marist's side of the ball. I trust their coaching staff. I think it's outstanding.
Yeah.
We've been to their practices. It is like a well-oiled machine. So there's a lot we're going to learn, but I'm going to pick Marist in this one.
All right. So let's move on to another, and we're going through the blue division here, but let's move on to the Loyola Warren game, Dan, and this is a Friday game, and it features 2 teams that I think are kind of trying to replace very different memories from 2025, right?
Yeah.
Warren finished 9-2. They won their conference. They were a perfect 7-0 in their conference. Loyola finished 4-5, a definite down year for them, although they played, everybody points to that first playoff game where they played Mount Carmel. I think they played them 2 weeks in a row, right? They played in the last game of the regular season, first game of the playoffs. They lost 21-17, but they seem to be putting things together. Loyola is really young, or they were really young last year, so they've got a lot of their top players coming back this year. Plus, maybe the biggest difference maker, and we'll see, is Coach John Holisek is coming back, and he's their head coach.
Yeah, Joe, and we've talked about the difference Coach Holisek makes to that team for whatever reason, and I've said they're really well. They were really well coached. They looked like Loyola the past couple of years, but I do think that there's something that will be added a little boost to them. On top of that, Joe, they've got great players. Got 6 guys that are FBS players, and they're a loaded team. In any other year, they are really loaded. But when you're with Mount Carmel and Brother Rice, and they just seem like a really good team. Now that I've seen they're highly ranked, and it's probably rightly so. But this is a really interesting game because Warren is very good, like you said. They have an experienced offensive line. They are tough, and they are always super fast. Play super fast, strong running game. They spread and run as well as anybody out there. I just think Loyola, in a bit of a squeaker, pulls this one out. But I do think it's really, really tight. I think the difference is going to be some of the players on Loyola's defense that have a hand in keeping Warren down just a little bit. But it's at Warren, so that could be a big deal too. It's going to be a crazy crowd.
It is going to be a crazy crowd. And one of the things is, and you mentioned the talent that Loyola has up and down, and, people are talking about their running backs. You've got Jaden Garrett. He's got, who's poised to have a great year, and he's only going to be a junior. You got Melo Maldonado, another junior running back, so 2 guys really young. And you've got Jordan McKinley, the wide receiver, also a junior, and Charlie Fowler, going to Boston College, 6'6" receiver. So they've got talent up and down both sides, when you look at it. And I think this is going to come down to Warren's offense versus Loyola's defense, right? Loyola's got some really good players on the defensive side of the ball. They've got returning defensive player of the year, I think, in their division, Will Meddy.
Dog team.
Who's dog team for sure.
Yep.
Outstanding linebacker. They've got other players as well. I think Warren, when you look at, their history and the way they play, and, they're always good. But, when you look at who they lost their most productive and best player in their running back, right? So it's really tough to replace that, even though they've got a lot of pieces that are still there. But, I don't think it's going to be enough to, to knock off Loyola. So I'm picking Loyola in this game as well.
Okay. Yeah. I thought we might differ on a couple of those, but that's good. That's good.
Yeah. All right. Now we've got Brother Rice and Lincoln Way East. And this is at Lincoln Way East Friday. And for me, this was probably the most difficult week 1 game to predict.
Why is that?
I don't know. Brother Rice obviously is defending Class 7A state champ. They finished 13-1 last year. Lincoln Way East was 9-3, reached the Class 8A quarterfinals, and then they lost big to Mount Carmel, 48-7.
Right.
And the one thing, and I'll go right into this, Dan. I'm going to pick Brother Rice to beat Lincoln Way East in this. And anytime, and I just mentioned this with Warren having to replace their running back, who was their star, Lincoln Way East has got to replace Jonas Williams, who's been their star for a couple of years. And even though you still have a lot of good pieces in place, playing anybody else other than Brother Rice, maybe my pick might be a little bit different, but losing Jonas Williams, he's off to USC. I think trying to replace that caliber of a player and still think or still be able to predict that you're going to be in that discussion with some of the best teams in the state, we'll see. But I don't think we're going to see that in week 1. I think Brother Rice takes care of Lincoln Way East.
The most interesting thing to me about this game, other than the matchup itself, is how Brother Rice is going to handle the quarterback position. I've seen that they might play 2, Rocco Galasso and freshman Sam Holcomb, which is what I really want to see, because he's supposed to have be a kind of special arm and be a special talent. Look for Jack McNamara, junior tight end for Brother Rice to have a big game. Like, if you've got a new quarterback, that's an easy thing to do, is get the ball to a tight end, and a big FBS type player at tight end is something that's really going to help. He's also got Jordan Moore and Lucas Strang. Those guys they're awesome with talent, but I think a safety blanket could be Jack McNamara. And, when I'm looking at this game, the thing about Lincoln Way East is we know they're going to be good. We know they're going to be good because they're a really good, well-coached program. But we don't know much about players. They've got one offensive lineman going to U of I. They've got, coach's son playing linebackers, Vonar, he's a great player. He was very good last year, and the coach is awesome. So, but I think that Brother Rice might be out-talenting them here and could be a little bit overwhelming. It's at Lincoln Way East, but it's definitely a great game to watch. It's 2 top 20 programs, but I'm picking Brother Rice.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned this before when we talked about the preview of the Blue Division, Dan, though. Brother Rice has Jamison Davis, who's a really good running back, right? And you mentioned quarterbacks and Rocco Galasso and Sam Holcomb, and it does look like they might kind of alternate between them. But, I have a feeling that, they're going to, at least early on in the season, rely on their running game for offense. When you look at their offensive line, I think Coach Kuenfeld said the biggest offensive line he's ever had. Ethan Posey is back. They've got Carlos Rios and Lucas Rios. They've got Daniel D'Souza. They've got to average close to 300 pounds across their offensive line, at least 290.
I can't believe it took you this long to mention that, because that is your thing. Big guys as big as a planet. Yes, across the offensive line. It's the old John Robinson theory.
Right.
I think that that is a great call. If you can turn around and hand the ball off to Jamison Davis behind that massive offensive line, you're in pretty good shape, and play really good defense. And with Cam McGee and Braden Parks, they should be set up pretty well. That's why I think they're a pretty solid pick this week.
Yeah, I think so too. All right. So the next game, and this is a true champion versus champion matchup, Dan, is St. Francis at New Palestine, which is in Indiana. So St. Francis last year finished 11-3. They won the Class 5A championship by they defeated Providence 39-35. New Palestine 14-0 last year and won the Indiana Class 5A state championship. The other thing I saw about New Palestine is that they've had back-to-back state titles, and they've got a 28-game winning streak. They're 28-0. So this is one of the tougher matchups. I think after the Mount Carmel East St. Louis, this one is the next one as far as, picking a team game one right out of the gate. That's really going to be a challenge for you. And I think that's going to be the case for St. Francis in this game.
Yeah, New Palestine, Joe, I watched a little film. They've got a quarterback transfer, Reese Reagan. He is a stud. He's kind of a slight guy. He's not real big, but he throws and runs. Mm-hmm. And he reminds me of Brock Phillip from St. Francis last year. So, and they've got big time playmaking receivers. I'm really looking forward to seeing James McGrath in St. Francis's backfield, one of my favorite players in the conference, how he does against this group. He's a big hitter. I'm anxious to see if some of these New Palestine wide receivers get alligator arms coming across the middle with James McGrath kind of patrolling back there.
Right.
But watch both QBs early, see who settles in first. It'll tell you a lot, but I think Indiana schools play with a chip on their shoulder against Illinois. I think that's kind of a thing, whether it's true or not. It's kind of something that I've always felt like. And if I were them, I would play that up as a coach. But so I'm picking New Palestine in this, Joe. I'm picking them. I think they while both teams have a lot to replace, I think New Palestine's in a little bit more secure position at home. So my pick is for New Palestine in this one.
Yeah, and you mentioned the quarterback's gonna kind of settle in, and I think because of the returning quarterback for New Palestine, I think they're going to, or he's going to settle in a little bit quicker than the new quarterback for East St. Louis, and that's Jaden Wilson. For St. Francis, Jaden Wilson, who transferred from East St. Louis. Highly talented kid, but St. Francis has a lot of new pieces.
Yeah,
at some of the key positions, meaning quarterback. They've got Greg Bess-Henning, who transferred in, as a wide receiver. They've got another transfer, Noah Turner, another one from another wide receiver from Wisconsin, Elijah Valeri. So, I know they've had time to practice and kind of gel as a team in that, but, I think it takes a little bit longer to do that, when you've got this many new players in that many key positions. And, playing New Palestine in the first game of the year, you don't have a chance to work into things and to gel, right? It's just not an option for you in game one. So I am going with New Palestine as well in this game, Dan. So I think they take care of business over St. Francis. So I think you and I we're all the same except the first game.
Except
far.
Mount Carmel. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I stepped out a little bit. You played it safe. So we move on.
Here we go. Wait a minute. Yeah.
Hey, Joe, this is just one of a bunch of great games that, the focus is going to be in Mount Carmel and East St. Louis, and that's Saturday, but this is a great Friday game. If you can find a way to watch it, it's going to be a good one. So definitely one of the more interesting games out there. Hoping St. Francis does well, but we haven't really talked about transfers, but they got transfers. So we'll see. And it's always different when the lights come on. Always.
Mm-hmm. Always. I agree. So we'll move on to another great game. So I don't think you're going to have enough screens available, Dan, to watch all the great games Friday and Saturday.
I know.
So it's going to be tough. This one is St. Rita and Providence. And what are you looking at in this game, Dan? What do you think is going to be the difference here?
I think this one is the Providence has so much known coming back. They've got their best playmakers coming back in the quarterback, and Dominic Vita, and running back and Broden Macker. They've got some really good offensive linemen coming back. So I just think there's more that that we know about Providence. And that is all really good stuff. Both these teams finished second in state last year. But St. Rita's got some work to do. We don't know much. We know Brandon Johnson, the mayor, is around, and he's probably going to be the focal point, at least early on. But there's not a ton out there. Defensively, they should be strong because they're going to be very well coached, and they've got Ohimai Azalua, who's a big time recruit. Michigan State is he going to Michigan State? Yeah, and Jack Shapendonk, which is an awesome name, at linebacker. So, but I think Providence has too much for them. I think they can put up 35 points, kind of easy. I think that's just kind of how they roll. I always said last year they looked to me like the best running team in the state, and I think they open up that way. But I think Dominic Vita is capable of beating you with his arm as well. I don't know much about either defense, so that'll be interesting to see if it's high scoring or if it is a little lower scoring than I thought. But my pick is Providence in this, Joe.
Yeah, and I looked at how I like to look at how many stars you got on each side of the ball.
Really important. Team. Yes, you're a star watcher for sure.
Yes, I am a star watcher, and when I look up and down both sides, or offense and defense for both teams, I see more stars on Providence than I do on St. Rita. I mean, St. Rita has some very talented players, and I think they're going to play really tough this year, and I think they're going to have a good season in that. But I don't think they have enough to compete with Providence, especially at this point of the year, right away in game one. I mean, you mentioned Dom Vita, Providence's quarterback, outstanding last year. He's only going to be a junior this year. He can run, he can pass. He's another one of those dual threats. Got Broden Macker, who rushed for over 1,700 yards last year. He's coming back. You've got a couple of wide receivers that, are coming back. I didn't realize kind of how young Providence was last year, too. When I looked at who they have returning, I said, these were all guys that were big contributors for them last year. So, they are loaded.
They've kind of pointed, I think, Joe, to these two classes, the junior and senior classes, as classes that get them back to a state championship. I think they maybe felt like if you were to ask their coaches in private, they were a year early last year.
Yeah, and they were, and they're probably, they would have loved to have won the state championship last year for sure. They got to the game, but I think this is their year, right? You mentioned this is their year they've kind of been pointing to, and I think they're going to show that right away in game one here against St. Rita, and I'm picking Providence in this game as well. All right, Dan, I know who you're going to pick in this game. You're going to pick an upset, I think. And it's the Montini versus Hoopston Armstrong game.
The Corn Jerkers?
The Corn Jerkers, our favorite team name going into the year, right? Yeah. And I still have not seen the logo, but I'm going to look it up and see what it looks like. Just be careful on the search you do. Yeah. Have the safety toggle on in your Google search. Yeah. All right. So what do you think about Montini versus Hoopston Armstrong, Dan?
I mean, it's a big win. It could be the biggest spread of the weekend. It would be. It's Montini loaded, and Hoopston we don't know a ton about other than their nickname. But Montini, Israel Abrams, and company, and on defense you still have Namari Anderson and Ben Evenson, dog winner. So Johnny Louise, right? He's back too. Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, they're in a really good spot. One of the top 3 teams in the state, even though they're a small school. So this is probably one of the easier picks, Joe, and it's Montini.
Yeah. I'm picking Montini too for all the reasons you just mentioned. And, was looking at all the weapons that Montini has, starting with Israel Abrams, obviously, but when their wide receiver room is unreal. I mean, You've got Luca Florio, Damasio Ortegon, Johnny Neustadt, it's another guy. Donovan Evans, who's a transfer from St. Rita. I'm not sure how much we mentioned him in our preview episode. And then you've got, I can't think of his, Daniel Sago, the newcomer, right, that everybody's talking about. So just the weapons Montini has on offense and, stepping right in on defense. They've got guys coming back. We love Santino Tenuto last year, but they've got, linebacker coming back. You just mentioned his name. I'm missing it right now. Johnny Louise, who, is going to be one of our favorite names this year, I'm sure.
For sure.
And I think he's going to have an outstanding year. So, I'm picking Montini in this game as well.
Yeah, we're riding the Bronco.
Yeah, we are riding the Bronco. And Montini, I think you want to ride the Bronco as well. You know what else they're doing on before this game? They're dedicating their new field. Actually, they just resurfaced their field to Chris Andriano. You remember him,
really?
Right? Yeah,
sure.
Head coach. So before the game, it's a dedication of the Chris Andriano field. He coached at Montini for 38 seasons. Did you realize that?
Yeah,
I mean, I knew
he was a
there
coach
forever.
when I played. Was he there when you played? When we played against him? Yeah.
Yeah. 300 games he won. What else? 12 conference championships, 6 state titles. He reached 7 consecutive state championship games from 2009 to 2015. It's unreal, isn't it?
Yeah. That's unreal and good for him. That is a great gesture. Montini does that stuff as well or better than anyone.
They are the best at
honoring their past. So good for him. It's a great thing that they're doing, and they should get a great win out of it as well.
Yeah. All right. So the next game, Dan, is Nazareth at IC. Another really good game. I think this is one of the best Week 1 games in the Chicago Catholic League,
without a doubt.
Yeah, and 2 legitimate kind of state title contenders. In this game, Nazareth last year got to the semifinals. They lost to Fenwick in overtime. Great game, that game. IC reached the 3A, I think, quarterfinals last year. And, one of the big things for IC this year, which I think gives them an edge in a lot of their games, is they've got Nate Lang coming back, right? Who is their starting quarterback for, I think, the last 2 years. So it'll be his 3rd year. Makes great decisions, is a real field general out there, is pretty elusive as well. So he can get out of the way of a lot of some of the defenses that they face, but as we mentioned, and as you talked about in our previous episode, Nazareth may have the best defense in the entire Chicago Catholic League. So This is going to be a huge test for IC for sure.
Yeah, we've talked about it before. I don't know if I remember a defensive backfield this loaded that I see for Naz. From Cash Coleman to the Sackless twins, Henry and Hank. And then you've got, Harry Keenan, who's an outside linebacker. You've got you've got studs rushing the passer in Chris Caskey
and Will McGarry.
And Will McGarry. Yeah, I mean, they just are absolutely stacked defensively. And I think the one thing that interests me about this game, Joe, or one of the big things is that Nate Lang is back. He's a guy that is as smart a football player as you're going to see.
Mm-hmm.
He could get rid of the ball in a hiccup, and he might have to, but I don't know if they're going to be able to sustain anything. They're going to need some big plays. I don't know if that's possible because this defense is so good, and I picked Nazareth to have the best defense in the state.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm picking Naz in this one. So, but both teams play a similar style, kind of that swarming defense that I've talked about for as long as we've had this podcast. That looks like there's more guys in the field than they're allowed, you know, but
right.
If this game were later in the year, I might pick differently, but I think Naz coming out is going to want to make a statement in this first week. They lost to IC last year, didn't they?
I'm not sure.
Put you on the spot. All right.
Put me on the spot. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think Naz gets the W in this game. Two great teams.
Yeah. And, you know, the biggest question mark for me for Naz is actually on offense, you know, with their new quarterback, JJ Chapman, who, you know, from all accounts is a really talented player and a really good quarterback. He transferred in, I think, from a school, something in Wisconsin. But, you know, he's, you know, for me, that's the only question mark. You know, I don't question their defense at all because, you know, I see the names up and down, what they're going to be able to do on the defensive line. At the linebacker position, they're stacked at DB as well. And I think, you know, I see in order for them to compete and win this game, they're going to need some huge plays. You know, whoever it comes from, whether it's Grant Bowen, whether it's Will Schmidt, you know, whether it's, I don't know, who else do they have? They've got Anthony Caraccio, another wide receiver, free safety, you know, but I'm not sure that they're going to have enough big plays in them or be able to get enough big plays in order to knock off Nazareth. Now, I'm not sure how Nazareth is going to score this year or how they're going to be on offense. And that'll be something we'll have to see. But I do think Nazareth's defense kind of carries them in this game. And I think they end up winning this game. But I do think it's a little bit closer than maybe some people might expect, just because I'm not sure, you know, what Naz's offense is going to be like.
Yeah. Well, they've got Christian Malachuk back for his 7th year. So
I'm sure there's another Malachuk in 8th grade or maybe a freshman, right?
Right. You're right. Yes.
We'll
they need a
about.
Malachuk on the roster just continuously for the next 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So our hashtag for Nazareth this year will just be hashtag Malachuk.
Hashtag always a Malachuk.
Always a Malachuk. Yeah. All right. So the next game we've got here, Dan, is DePaul Prep at Richards. And DePaul Prep is one of the bigger question marks for me this year for a variety of reasons, right? You know, Coach Passarella left. Coach Bizzieri took over. We interviewed him on an episode, but he only had, 7 or 8 weeks, you know, in the position in order to kind of get things ready. The other thing is they have had a ton of transfers out of that program.
Yeah.
And a lot of their key players or good players or players that you were going to be, you know, relying on this year at DePaul Prep, a lot of them have left. So I know the cupboard's not bare, you know, because I've seen the roster, seen some of the stuff regarding some of their players, and they look like, you know, they are ready to go, and I'm sure they will be under Coach Bizzieri. You know, but they're facing a Richards team that was 9-2 last year, number 1 seed in its half of Class 7A last year bracket, beat Edwardsville. They lost to a really good Hersey team, you know, and I think I saw that Richards returns 9 starters off of last year's team. And this is something we don't talk about as much, Dan, is, you know, Richards had 3 or 4 transfers from
Yes.
Yeah, from other public schools. transferred into Richards. Now, we don't talk about that. Everybody talks about the Chicago Catholic League and transfers there, but it's happening all over. And, Richards got some additional talent that, I'm sure they welcomed, in the form of transfers. And, this is going to be a really tough game for DePaul Prep, I think.
Yeah, I'm picking Richards in this one. They're pretty loaded with good players that are returning from a great team. And Joe, their transfer crop, you touched on it, it rivals anyone's as far as impact that it's going to make. And we've got a lot to learn. I feel like, and I know they're not, but I feel like other than Tyson Hooks, I kind of feel like we're starting from scratch with DePaul Prep. And, I'm looking at some of the names that we previewed on our player preview, and they're gone, from DePaul Prep. And, you can only coach who's there. And I'm sure they're doing a great job, and they've got some good classes that were coming up. I think this junior class should be a pretty good class for them. So, I'm sure the coach is doing those who remain will be champions. That's kind of the call for them this year. But I think, again, too much unknown for DePaul Prep. Richards has a lot of known, and even the guys transferring in just make them better. I think they're a pretty good favorite this week, so I'm picking Richards.
Yeah, I'm picking Richards too, Dan. I do think that, when we talk about, teams that maybe need to get some games under their belt before they really kind of start to hit their stride.
Yeah.
I think all the details, around DePaul Prep this year and all the changes that have gone on, I think they're one of those teams. And unfortunately, I think it's going to take them a little while to maybe get their legs underneath them here. Facing Richards, who's a really good team and a team with a lot of returning starters off a really good team last year, I think is a tough draw for them for the first game of the year. So I am going with Richards as well. So we still have not differed except for the first game.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think it's coming.
Yeah, I think it will be. And I don't know, maybe it's this one, Dan, and it's Joliet Catholic and Fenwick. So, tell me what you think about this game. Fenwick, defending 6A state champ, Joliet Catholic last year, coming off a tough year. Where do you think things start off this year in game one with Fenwick and Joliet Catholic?
I think Joliet Catholic is BATW.
Yeah. Okay.
I do.
Right away.
I think their schedule is an absolute bear.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think they are probably pointing to this game. I think that maybe people think Fenwick is vulnerable, and I do too. They've got Jake Thies. They've got a couple stud defensive or offensive linemen that are anchors, but they're two-way guys. They had a lot of two-way guys, so there's some unknown with Fenwick. So, Joe, I think this game is really closer than people think. Fenwick is highly rated everywhere I've seen. I think they probably earned that off of last year, but boy, it's risky to take a team that's lost so much and rank them that highly. So I think it's a close game, but I think Fenwick in a squeaker.
Yeah, boy, we're not going to differ here either, Dan. And for all the reasons you just mentioned, I do think Fenwick is probably got a little bit more talent than Joliet Catholic does. This is star power. They do. And, but last year when you looked at Fenwick and you said star power, you probably rattled off 3 or 4 guys, right? This year, you're probably rattling off 1 or 2.
Yeah.
So that's a difference. But on the other side, Joliet Catholic, same thing. You might be rattling off 1 or 2 names, with that star power, and that might be on defense.
And Vinny DeNovo and maybe Frankie Pachanka.
Right. Yeah. So I think from a standpoint of, big plays and who can kind of, turn the game on a big play, I lean on the side of Fenwick for that. And I think that's what it's going to take. Although I do think, like you said, this is going to be, a much closer game than maybe some people might think, but I'm going to pick Fenwick in this game.
Okay. Do you think it's going to be real close, Joe? That's what I made a big note of that I think it's close.
I do. I think it's going to be really close.
Yeah, me too.
Really close game. I think it might come down to, I thought about this, if it comes down to the kicker, last year I would have been on Fenwick's side, right, with Noah Sir. Right. This year, maybe Vinny DeNovo from Joliet Catholic. So
yeah, it's got to be our favorite kicker, right?
It's got to be our favorite kicker, Vinny DeNovo. Yeah, come on, what you talking about? Yeah. All right. How about St. Lawrence versus King? Game Friday. This is at St. Lawrence, and I think this game might be a little more interesting than it might initially appear to be, Dan. So St. Lawrence reached the semifinals last year in 6A. King also had a bit of a good run, too, in the postseason last year. They went to the 5A quarterfinals, and they lost 44-14 to, I think, St. Francis at that point. But, I think St. Lawrence has got to be the clear favorite at home, for sure, against King. And, they've got one of the best defensive players in the state in Sean Rice. And it was interesting. I saw in some of the stories or some of the social media stuff, it sounds like they might be using Sean Rice all over the place this year, both sides of the ball. I heard he's going to play a little running back. He might be a little tight end, maybe some wide receiver, in addition to his linebacker, duties as well. So, we were talking about who replaces Corey Less. That was a big question for St. Lawrence. Maybe they're looking at Sean Rice as, maybe being able to do that for them.
Yeah, that's interesting, Joe. You wonder if they like that recipe, that we have a guy and we're going to use that guy in a lot of different ways. And he's a dude. So not a bad choice because he can play. I've always thought, I'd like to see him more on the offensive side of the ball. I think that could be his future, maybe. I don't know. But King plays a nice schedule and is one of the better, CPL teams. So last year's game was 19-0 at St. Lawrence. I have a feeling I think we've just scratched the surface at St. Lawrence. I think they're one of the teams that we are going to see new stars, new guys show up. I think they have got this thing rolling, and because of where they're at and in Chicago and how they play and where they play, they can fly under the radar. But I think this is the last year they do that.
Yeah,
because I think we're going to see them be really, really good. I think they have a probably a more balanced team. Noah Taylor, if he's throwing the ball to Sean Rice, then they're in pretty good shape. And I think St. Lawrence takes this one again. Probably to me a similar score than what it was last year.
Yeah, which it was what
19-0.
I think they shut them out last year.
Yeah,
right?
19-0. Yep.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm picking St. Lawrence in this game. I am interested to see some of the quarterback play for St. Lawrence and see how that's progressed from last year to this year and how that might make a difference, in their offense, as well as, I think the biggest kind of question mark here is how they use Sean Rice. On offense. And we know he's a great athlete, right? But I don't think we've seen him play much offense previous to this. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And, they're going to have to, maybe rely on some of their more talented players, no matter what side of the ball they're on, to contribute on both offense and defense, like Sean Rice. So I'm picking St. Lawrence as well in this game. And let's move to Carmel and Hersey, Dan. And this may be one of the more compelling quarterback storylines of the week, of week one. You've got Jake Narot, who's committed to Kentucky, really had a great year last year, right? And, unfortunately, Carmel had to replace Trey Taylor, who was just accounted for a ton of their production last year on offense. I think his numbers were unbelievable. I think he had an over 80% completion rate, over 3,500 passing yards, 38 touchdowns passing, 633 rushing yards, 12 rushing touchdowns. I don't know. You don't replace that kind of player, right?
No.
I know they got a transfer in, right, to play quarterback, but, it's somebody that last year played quarterback and played fairly well, but, it's not the same production that you're going to get out of, or that you got out of Trey Taylor. So I think Carmel's going to rely heavily on, their junior running backs, Jordan Moore and Jaquel Edmonds. And I think that's a really good backfield combination. I like it, but they're going up against a really, really good Hersey team that returns 9 players on defense, Dan, from last year's team that I think only gave up an average of less than 15 points per game last year. So, their defense is going to be ready and raring to go in game one. They've got, one of the top quarterbacks in the state of Illinois, coming back with a couple of weapons. And for me, I think this is a really tough game for Carmel, first game of the year. And I am picking Hersey in this game, Dan.
All right, Joe. Yep, we're together on this one. I'm picking Hersey as well. Jake Naurat is a superstar quarterback, and they already could put up a ton of points. They always put up a ton of points. To have 9 guys back on defense, I think says a lot. I think they probably have state championship aspirations. In order for Carmel to win this game, they're going to have to control the football. With that running game that you talked about, I mean, it's going to be really interesting to, like you said, to watch. They've got some big offensive linemen. So Wide Van Boning is a big stud. And like you talked about the great running backs. They've got some superstars on defense. Christian Chaddock and they've got Jaquel Edmonds, who's kind of maybe a two-way player along with Jameer Miles. So they've got the talent, but I just think this Hersey team comes out kind of picking up where they left off.
Yeah,
right?
I do too.
They had nothing new to install. They had nothing new as far as people to move around and wonder if they had a bunch of questions. They're ready to go. So for that reason, I pick Hersey.
Yeah. All right. What about St. Ignatius at St. Viator, Dan? Who are you picking here?
Yeah, that's another tough one. I feel like St. Ignatius, they might be. I feel like they're back on the move again a little bit. They when that offense can have some experience to it, makes it way better. I think Viator, there's another team with a ton of unknown. They've lost a lot,
right?
2 transfers, and they've had to replace a lot from a 1-8 team. So it'll be really interesting to see how they look and where they get their production from. So I'm a little nervous about that. The strength of Ignatius is in the defensive backfield. So I'm picking St. Ignatius on this one because I think they're a bit of an up and comer. They might be someone, like I said in our with my bold prediction that they get to the round of 16. I had them at 6-6, and I had this as one of their wins. They're growing up and seeing, we started to see that late last year. So I think Viator has too much new. They've got a new quarterback transfer from South Elgin and Danny Traver, who'll be interesting to watch. But some of the losses might just be too much to overcome us early on. Viator's going to look better late in the year than they do early on.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think we mentioned that about them last year too, Dan, even though, they didn't end the year very well. I think they lost their last, I don't know how many games in a row. But, the other thing which was concerning about Viator last year, which, they definitely need to turn around this year, is they've got to score points. I felt like their defense was pretty good by the end of last year. They could keep them, within striking distance, but their offense just could not score. And I'm not sure if they've got the pieces in place this year, which are going to make that big of a difference on offense from last year to this year. And I know we mentioned, or we talked about how, St. Ignatius finished up the year pretty good last year. They won the Prep Bowl, and how much stock do you put in that? But I think from a standpoint of confidence and some of the players who got a chance to play in that prep bowl, primarily their quarterback, I think Reed Heights, who's going to be a junior, is going to play quarterback for them. I think those kind of things matter, when you can end the season last year really on a positive note going into the next year. And, they've got like a couple guys coming back, right, who were big time players for them last year, like, Connor Heights and Connor Wanzong. So I think they've got enough weapons here to make some noise within their schedule this year. And I think, right away they come out in week 1 and I think they beat St. Viator. And I actually think they beat them pretty easily, Dan.
Do you? Okay. Yeah. There's just a lot of unknown for St. Viator. So yeah, I'm with you on the win. We'll see how potent that offense is early on. So I'm not ready to say they're gonna do it easily, but I do think that they are the favorite here for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so now we move to Leo, who is at Proviso East, and this is a Saturday game at 1:30. And this year I think is got to be it's an important opener for Leo. Obviously, I mean last year they definitely made a step up. They got 4 wins. Their 4th win came in the Prep Bowl, but they beat another CCL team to get that 4th win in the Prep Bowl. They've got some returning talent as well. So, for me, and we've talked about Leo, and we've talked about how we think they're making a lot of progress under Coach Hopkins. I think this game will be pretty telling. I know Proviso East, is not considered a very good team. They've got a new coach. They didn't have a great year last year, but I think this will be good to watch, and good to watch Leo and see how some of the players that they're counting on, and they've got a lot of guys who are probably going to go both ways, but some of the players that they're going to be counting on throughout the year, and see how they perform in week 1.
Yeah, I'm picking Leo to win, and not my hope, but I think they should. I think they should win handily. Is kind of where I think they're at, and that they are no longer in that same tier as some of the teams that really struggle year in and year out. I don't think Leo should be counted that way. So I see them winning handily. I'm excited to watch Jabril Kanake. He was one of my favorite players last year. So yeah, you said they're going to have a lot of two-way players, and we're gonna see how they look, and I want to see how they throw the football and see how that looks, and defensively how physical they are. But I think it's some good scheduling, because I think they should win this game pretty handily.
Yeah, I think so too. I think Leo wins this game pretty handily as well, at least by several touchdowns. And, that'll be a good thing for them if that happens, because, they'll go into the rest of their schedule or game 2 with a lot of confidence, which I think will make a big difference for Leo this year too. So I'm picking Leo over Proviso East. And we've got De La Salle and Revis. And this is a matchup between, Revis last year, who beat De La Salle pretty handily in the first game of the year, I believe. And I think Revis made the playoffs last year too.
Yeah,
so
they did.
Yeah, De La Salle, we know some of the challenges they've had a couple of years ago. We know they talked about, we are pointing to some of our younger classes and some of the talent and commitment that's there in our younger classes. And, if that was the case, and if that's true, then this might be the year that some of that starts to show for De La Salle, but even with that said, I think, I think De La Salle is probably going to have another tough year. I do like some of the stuff I've watched on social media, and they're working hard. The guys are in the weight room, and they're, the energy is way up, and I love that, but I just think it takes a couple of years of growth and talent and that kind of energy and work in the weight room to get yourself to a point where you're going to be able to put together, some wins. And I don't think they're going to be able to do that in week 1 against Revis. I do think they're probably going to show that they have made progress which would be great, and maybe that continues throughout the season. But I think they fall to Revis in game 1.
Joe, I'm picking the upset. I'm taking De La Salle to make a statement and reversing last year's blowout loss.
Okay.
I think that would be a great thing. I love guys like Elijah Sirleaf. I think he made a big difference, and I saw some of the same stuff you saw on social media, and think they're ready. It's year 3 under Coach Blackman, and so I think it's time that they're looking for a statement. If I'm them, I'm not even talking about 2 years ago. That doesn't exist anymore. It's not part of our program anymore. We are here to win football games. We're not here to just show up and make sure everyone's at practice. We need to win some games. And I think De La Salle makes a statement this year, and I'm picking them to win this game.
All right, awesome. I like it. I like the pick, Dan. What do you think of Marion Catholic at Bloom?
Love this game. Love it. This is exactly
what do you love about it?
Because it's exactly what I think the new playoff schedule allows teams to do, and allows you to schedule those, especially this private and public rivalry games. These teams are, less than 6 miles apart. I didn't do my research. I don't know exactly how far they are apart. I know it's close.
They're both in Chicago Heights, right? I think
less than 3 miles apart. I'm just going to guess.
That close. Yeah. I think the last time we said this, one of our listeners weighed in and said, these guys don't play together growing up. What are you guys talking about? I said, how can they not play together? They're all in Chicago Heights, right?
Right. Yeah. Where are they playing then? So yeah, I'm picking Marion Catholic to win this game. Yeah. I love that it's being played. I think Marion Catholic is one of those teams that, that has the potential to surprise people and be pretty good. Be interested to see what they're going to do at quarterback. They've got some guys to replace, some difference makers on both sides of the ball. But I think they have some talent. I think they could lack size, but I don't think that matters in week 1 against Bloom. And I'm picking them for the W.
Yeah, I'm picking Marion Catholic as well for the W. And, I think Marion Catholic probably just has a little bit too much or a little bit more talent than Bloom might have. And I do, Bloom does have talent, but, one of the things when I look at some of the information on these teams, Dan, is, when I see them talk about who their key players are, and if they give like a bunch of stats along with the player, I always think that's a good thing, especially if the stats are good. But what I wasn't able to find on Bloom was that they mentioned guys, but they just said they're a receiver, or they're a safety, or they're a running back. No stats, nothing like that.
Right.
So. I don't know how much stock you put in that, but I put a little bit into it. And I think Marion Catholic has got a little bit more from an explosive standpoint, as far as their running back, who's Antonio Banks. Is that his name? Is that name ring a bell? Yes. Yep. And, not a huge guy. I think he's 5'7", 5'8", 170 pounds, but boy, is he shifty and can run and fast. Yeah. So I think a player like that makes a difference in a game like this. So I'm going with Marion Catholic in this game too, over Bloom. All right. And now we're moving to St. Patrick at Rolling Meadows, Dan. And this game is on Friday. And I think this is one of the more evenly matched games of the week.
Yeah.
Both teams made a significant amount of progress last year under first-year head coaches. With Zibikowski at St. Patrick, they went from 2-7 to 6-5 last year. Won the Purple Division, 3-0 in the Purple Division last year. Defeated Wakanda, who had a really good team, in the opening round of the Class 5A playoffs. Rolling Meadows also got in the playoffs last year. They ended up losing to Fenwick in the second round. And,
right.
I feel like both teams are now kind of looking at the same question or same thing. Was last year kind of this 1-year surge, or was it the beginning of something sustainable? And, I think from St. Patrick's standpoint that it's a beginning of something sustainable.
Yeah, me too.
they've got some key players coming back, and if you can have a key player coming back who's your quarterback, that's huge. And they've got 6'6" Gavin Gardner, threw for over 2,000 yards last year and 16 touchdowns. The one thing that St. Patrick did do is they graduated, or they lost 35 guys off their team last year, 35 seniors. Yeah. And a lot of those were on the line, offensive and defensive line. Now they do have, a couple of linemen coming back, younger guys. One is a big recruit. I can't think of his name. Is that Dylan Moda?
Dylan Moda, yep.
Yeah, 6'8", 285, but, that's tough when you lose that much, that many players and that much depth at some of the key areas. And I think those key areas were the offensive line and, some of their skill players. But I do think that St. Patrick is building something there. Rolling Meadows has to replace their quarterback from last year. And I do think Rolling Meadows is going to have a good team this year and going to be good. But I don't think they match up well with St. Patrick in week 1. So I'm picking St. Pat's here in week 1 against Rolling Meadows.
Joe, I'm with you. Picking St. Pat's as well. And it's funny that you said that, because I feel like these two teams, like Rolling Meadows is the North Suburban version of St. Pat's.
Yeah.
Kind of like what you said, different team makeup. But I mean, Joe, your star power tells you that St. Pat should win this. Folarancho on the D line and Dylan Moda on the O line. Those are two big time recruits.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked Gavin Gardner last year. Yeah. And I think he just scratched the surface. I think Pats is going to have some guys that make a difference that we maybe haven't talked about a ton, that we will be talking about a ton going into this year. I'm interested to see their O-line has been so good and so big. We talked about that forever. They do lose some people there, but I do think they're the better team here. And I think Pats gets the victory week.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And now we move to the Marmion versus Racine Lutheran game, Dan. And this is a cross-state matchup. Marmion against a team from Wisconsin. And Racine Lutheran is, not a pushover in any means, right? They reached the second round of their Division V playoffs last year. Marmion finished 4-5 last year, a little bit of a down year for them. I do think they've been kind of pointing towards this year, especially after their season kind of went off the rails last year at Marmion. But I think they finished up a little bit stronger at the end of last season. But I don't think this is a typical small Wisconsin school coming to Illinois matchup type thing. I think Racine Lutheran is completely capable of winning this game. So, it's one of the games that I feel like I had a real hard time predicting, and my prognosticus did not help me at all, because he was along the same lines as I was and just said, I don't know, just pick whoever you want.
Shut up.
Shut up. But I think that based on some of the players I saw that Racine Lutheran has coming back, and as well as Marmion too, I think, Marmion's got Henry Miller at the running back. They've got Colin McInerney, who kind of plays all over the field, but probably wide receiver on offense. So, they do have some really good weapons, but I think this is going to be tough for Marmion. And just based on what I've saw as far as players coming back and previous records and, how these teams do both on offense and defense, I just see Racine Lutheran kind of pulling off a win here in game 1 against Marmion.
Yeah, Joe, I'm picking Racine Lutheran too. I mean, that's essentially an Illinois school, right? Right on the border there. They have good players back from a 7-win team, and they have high expectations. So Marmion's going to try and ground and pound. But I don't know if that'll be enough this week. Interested to see what happens at quarterback, who's playing, how they play, how they use Colin McInerney. I think they're on record as saying they want to try and, run the ball a lot because of Henry Miller. So while they've got some guys back, some all-conference players and some good players that have done a lot. We've said their names like Nick Roche, and Ryan Loria. So I don't know how many players will be two-way players, but I think it's a tough start. It's a tough schedule because Racine Lutheran's pretty good, so I'm picking Racine.
Yeah. So do you think it makes a difference at all at Marmion that they now have girls going there? Do you think that gives them a little boost in their step for their first game?
A little spring in their step? It's not like their stands were limited to all guys. Yeah.
No.
A little extra boost in the down the hallway.
Yeah. Whoop-a-doo, little skip. Yeah. Let's go play some football. Yeah. We'll see if that makes a difference. All right. Next game here, Dan, is our alma mater, Benet at Lena-Winslow, the 1A state champ from last year. And, when I was looking at, maybe different storylines or that kind of thing, I looked at this game or thought about this game and I thought, it's really kind of an unusual matchup, isn't it? For week one?
Yes.
Whether it's from the standpoint of the difference in the size of the schools and, you've got Benet from the suburbs, and then you've got Lena-Winslow, who's downstate a little bit. And, it's just two completely different types of programs and teams and fans and all of that. There is so much difference on both sides here that it's really going to be an unusual but interesting game to watch, because it is the first game under new head coach James White for Benet. And, they've picked a team that, I don't know, are they...
They're a powerhouse.
Powerhouse. Yeah, that's a good word for them. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, Lena's a powerhouse. Like they are picked to be number one again. They were number one by a long shot last year. They return guys. If you get the enrollment of the schools out of your head,
yeah,
it's not a stretch to pick Lena-Winslow because they've got guys returning from a state championship team. They have a system that they run forever and ever. Benet is really young. They're one of these teams that their better football is going to be played later in the year because there's just so much unknown. I think, outside of enrollment, I think Lena's got bigger people up front, and on either side of the ball, they've got more experience. So the only weird thing is that they're 1A, and it's like, well, what does that look like? Well, Bennett's team, we know some of these teams have struggled with numbers, and Bennett's one of those teams. So I don't know how big Bennett's team is numbers wise, but I just think that because there's so much unknown with Benet, I can look at Jackson Bonebreak, Dean Mia, John Erickson, and maybe Luca Diamidi as guys who played, but these are not a ton of. Dean Mia is the only returning all conference player.
Right.
And I don't know if he's going to be a two-way player or not. So, I don't think it's a stretch to pick Lena. And that's what I'm doing. I'm going to pick Lena-Winslow because I just think if we measure it the same way and take the enrollment completely out of it, that Lena's an easier pick.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. One of the things that I read was that Lena-Winslow, their offense, everyone knows what's coming. Right? They don't hide what they're going to do at all, but they don't care because they do it so well. They only threw the ball, I think last year, 24 times out of the whole season. They just turn the ball off. They do that misdirection type running game where, you put your hand in this guy's belly, and then that guy's got the ball over there. Right?
Yes.
I hate that. I hate those kind of teams.
Yeah.
Right.
What do we call that? We call that the I-39 and West, and that's where they are. They're West, right? This is Galena area. So probably be really nice field. Nice. So you could go get coffee or a beer after the game. Really nice area.
Right. Yeah. The other thing that I found pretty amazing, and you and I have talked about this, is how do you develop a program?
Yeah.
A good program. And we said it takes, it takes being involved, even with the kids at, when they're coming up through the junior ranks or whatever, the little league ranks in football.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's what Lena-Winslow does.
Heck yes.
They run, the youth teams run the same offense that the high school runs.
Yep.
And once they identify somebody at the youth level that this guy's going to play running back, they keep developing him, and he's playing running back when he gets to high school. I mean, it's just amazing, what they do.
It's like the old Soviet Union in the Olympics. Right. They identify him at age 8, and you don't play anything but quarterback the rest of your life.
Yeah. And I'm, obviously I'm interested to see how Benet is going to be this year, and this is one of the games I really want to watch because I want to see how Benet is going to be under, James White, what kind of offense they're going to run, who they're going to rely on.
It's definitely interesting this week for sure. Yeah. It's interesting for that too, and the game itself. But yeah, they are definitely one of the more interesting teams to take a look at this weekend.
Yeah, so I think Lena-Winslow probably scores the same amount of points it always scores in every game, right, against Benet. Right. I'm not sure Benet is going to be able to hold them down, and I just don't think Benet, is at that point yet where you don't necessarily know where they're going to get their points from. From this offense yet. And that's a big question mark. So, I'm going to pick Lena-Winslow in this game too.
Yeah. So, yeah, we'll be persona non grata for a while.
Yes, we will. Yeah.
Always. In Lyle. Yeah. But hey, we got to be honest. And like I said, I think what I finally ended up doing was just taking the enrollment out of it. Right. And not looking at it. And, so
that's probably a good way to look at it.
Same criteria that I use to pick these games, it was Lena.
Yeah. All right. So I believe the last game we have here, Dan, is the Notre Dame Westinghouse game. And that's Friday, tomorrow, 7:00. If you look at on paper, this looks like a pretty even matchup, right? Between two teams, who are trying to be, competitive or growing as programs and, trying to get to that competitive level. I think Notre Dame's record last year, and they were 3-6, was a little bit deceptive. I really do. They played a really tough Chicago Catholic League schedule last year. They were competitive in some of the games. I remember the Joliet Catholic game, which we didn't pick them. We picked Joliet Catholic, but, they put up a tough fight against Joliet Catholic last year. They were a young team last year. They got some really good returning players. They ended up playing some of their best football at the end of the year last year. Well, they beat Leo 40-18. They beat Marion Catholic, the Red Division champs, 30-14. Before they lost to St. Ignatius, but only by 1 point. So, it was first year under Coach DeFranza. This is the second year. They've got some things that I think they're able to build on from last year. They got a big running back and Raymond Gaspard, 6 foot, 220 pounds. I think they're going to rely on him a lot. They've got another, Christopher Love, 190-pound junior running back. They've got some good linebackers returning on defense. So I think they're starting to put some of the pieces in place at the key positions that are going to start to show some progress this year. So, I wonder who's going to play quarterback for him. I think it's going to be Eric Cooper, right? Is that the name?
I think so too. That's everything I've read points to Eric Cooper.
Yeah. And they've got some size too on the line, which is good. So, and Notre Dame is one of the teams that I picked as surprise this year, and I still think they're going to do that. And I'm going to pick Notre Dame in this game against Westinghouse, even though I was looking at Westinghouse, and on the defensive front, they are enormous. I don't know if you saw that, but they've got 6'3", 270 pounds in George Martin's space. Sequarius Jones is 275 pounds. Keontae Reed is 250 pounds. Then they have Perry Foster Jr. at 6'5", 340 pounds. That's their defensive line right there. So, you're gonna be in a game on the line, trying to move some of those guys.
Yeah, just moving some of those guys is tough. But Notre Dame, like you said, they've got the size. So I think Coach DeFranza is like also another guy ready to move on from any old thoughts about, oh, we're building, this is what we're trying to do, we're taking our time, we're in year 2. No, he's ready to win. He's like, let's go. We expect to be a playoff team. We expect to be fighting for the Purple Division championship. Those are our expectations, really high. No gradual run here. So I think they're going to be pretty good. I think they could look like maybe like a St. Pat's did last year. So I think that's a really good surprise pick for you, Joe. So I am picking them over Westinghouse week 1. Not sure what their backfield's going to look like, and who gets what reps, but I don't want to guess wrong. So. But I do know they have a good O-line. I know they always have a strong defense under Coach DeFranza. So I think they get the win in this one.
Okay. All right. So that's all the teams, Dan, and that completes our first Prognosticus episode and predictions of the 2026 Chicago Catholic League football season. So the picks have been made. The scores are on record. There's no turning back now, Dan. Your picks are in. By the end of the weekend, one of us, we might be explaining what went wrong. We only differed on 2 games, so that's not much. But more importantly, we're about to get our first real look at all 24 Chicago Catholic League teams. We'll begin finding out which preseason contenders are ready to live up to the expectations, which teams may be further along than anticipated, and which players are prepared to become the breakout stars of the season. And now we want to hear from you. Which of our predictions do you agree with? Where did we get it completely wrong? And what upset are you calling in week 1? Leave your picks in the comments and follow along with us throughout the season as we keep score in the Prognosticus standings. Be sure to subscribe to the Varsity Voices wherever you listen to your podcasts, and to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And don't miss our game recaps, which will be over the weekend on Sunday, and our analysis and weekly predictions throughout the season. Also, reminder, go to our Substack to get some more in-depth detail, power rankings, and more in-depth detail on some of our predictions. That's at the varsityvoices.substack.com. The talking is finished. It is finally time for football. Enjoy week 1, everybody, and we will see you next time on the Varsity Voices.